family and fellow soldiers. I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Michigan's current governor, Gretchen Whitmer, who did absolutely nothing for black Michiganders, is term limited, so she'll be leaving office soon, and now the predictable brawl is on to see who's going to become the next do-nothing governor of the state. And I guess that's the reason why we're suddenly hearing so much about the state's lieutenant governor, Garlin Gilchrist II, who, by the way, got into office about the time that Gretchen Whitmer did. He's being touted by the white media as a native son of Detroit. In fact, they said that now more than they did when he ran for lieutenant governor. In a majority white state like Michigan, where the governor has made it her hallmark to totally ignore black voters, why is the white media going out of their way to big this guy up as being from Detroit, saying that his parents are from there and so are his grandparents and such? I mean, they're just laying it on thick. Almost as thick as he is patting himself on the back. He's a computer science major who worked at Microsoft, and what did he do with his computer science background? Well, he went to work as a social media manager for Barack Obama's campaign, and he was a national campaign director for MoveOn.org. He brags that he's a classically trained community organizer. Now, you know, of course, chatter like that is meant to appeal to the boomer crowd, those old folks, any of those people who might have had their youthful heyday back during the 60s and 70s is meant to get them to go, oh, community organizer. He's basically regurgitating Barack Obama's talking points, so we're getting more of that. This guy smells like the DNC's been grooming him for office for a few years based on being politically reliable. Now, this is not to say that they've given up on the whole bring in a bunch of biracial immigrants who the Democrats will say is black strategy. What it does mean is that at least for now, somebody in DNC headquarters is trying to float some trial balloons, and this guy is one of the first. He didn't exactly drop down from Mars, but he's definitely not somebody who we cultivated. He's not somebody who we are familiar with, and he's not someone who's trying to familiarize himself with us either. Now, I'm sure I can guess what many of you are already asking. Is this guy one of those tethers? Well, he looks like his roots could definitely be going back to West Africa pretty directly, though according to him, his parents were born and raised in Detroit, and his grandmother worked in Detroit public schools for 32 years. Now, we have to understand that tethers have been coming to the U.S. long before the 60s. Sure, the 60s was when their numbers became turbocharged, but we had a tether problem long before that. And by the way, when we say tethers, what we don't mean is automatically if somebody comes from outside the United States, that means they're a tether. That's not what it means at all. What it does mean is individuals who have come from abroad who are not on code. That's what tether means. Now, while it's hardly conclusive, I would say that with a name like Garland, especially saying that this guy is Garlin Gilchrist II, it makes me wonder to myself if perhaps his roots actually would go back to, say, the islands on a long enough timeline. And I think that it's a fair question because when he was running for lieutenant governor, he went out of his way to connect himself to immigrants. Quote, "We are lifted by the dreams of grandparents like mine who migrated here from Alabama and Arkansas and all across the world in search of opportunity." So when I hear something like that, sure, Alabama and Arkansas is good to hear, but I'm wondering if he's basically saying that's where they wound up after they went all across the world in search of opportunity. From abroad, perhaps? Is that where they originated? These are the kind of weasel words that we could actually do without. But regardless of his grandmother's place of birth, it's disturbing that he's doing the same song and dance that we get from the Congressional Black Talkers. A few weeks back, I showed you a video of how the current CBC chairman, Stephen Horsford, was talking about how he considers himself to be more immigrant than anything else, bragging about his immigrant background and all the rest. This guy's prioritizing people who are not even citizens. So whenever you have somebody who stands in front of a group of foundational black Americans or in a foundational black American majority city, and they're sitting here talking about immigrants and everyone else and basically ignoring us, that's saying something. And what's also saying something is that folks are beginning to realize, however reluctantly, that there is a litmus test that's being imposed. A standard is being used by the grassroots. So expect to see more people who suddenly start talking about their folks being from the Deep South. Expect to hear more of these politicians, these Negroes they bring among us, who are going to start name-dropping those southern states and saying, my grandmama and grandpappy came from Alabama, from Louisiana, Mississippi, etc., etc. Expect to hear some of that stuff coming up. Barack Obama's name is Mud, so somebody who's going to sit here and try to resurrect the Pan-African patois of this is a brother from the motherland, that's not going to fly. And they also can't count on goofy stunts like Kamala Harris saying, oh, of course I don't have a problem with people who smoke weed. After all, I'm from Jamaica. Yeah, but is she from the black part of Jamaica? A huge question mark on that one. But why is this guy getting so much attention from the white media? Because, of course, the white powers that be are looking for a way to get black folks re-engaged with a process that's offered us nothing in decades. When Gretchen Whitmer took office, Republicans controlled the state legislature. In fact, they controlled it for most of the last 30 years. They lost control of it briefly in 2022, and maybe the Democrats thought that they were on a roll, but the GOP regained the state legislature, at least the House, in 2024. Democrats have no excuse for allowing this. They want to energize black voters in Detroit, Flint, and what black presence there is in Lansing, but they don't want to do anything for those black voters. If anything, you should have had people like Gretchen Whitmer and the state attorney general actually going after the creeps who allowed the Flint water poisoning. But so far, those statewide Democrats just can't get a full head of steam about it. If Republicans control the state legislature, but Democrats have the governor's office, then for the Democrats, that means the white leftists will still get what they want. And that's the reason why they want to mobilize those black votes, whatever it takes to turn out the black vote. In America, in these purple and a lot of these so-called blue states, the reality is there aren't really blue states per se in America. What you have are red states that oftentimes will have a dominant blue city or two within them. What this allows Democrats to do is to centralize the Democratic voter base, and that's fine except for the fact they haven't been using this centralization to do anything for the voters, the black voters who put them in office. Now, there is no way that the GOP would be having their white base put them in office, and they're not talking about what they're going to be doing for them, putting them front and center in all of their campaigning, but with Democrats, it's exactly the opposite. And what is Gilchrist himself promising to do about any of this horrible status quo? Basically, he's making a bunch of corny computer science puns saying that he's an engineer and that when the system's broken, he knows how to get those systems working better for people. Of course, he doesn't say what in the state of Michigan that he's going to fix, and to continue his goofy computer science puns, he doesn't specify whether the quote-unquote system merely needs a reboot, a firmware update, or a new motherboard. It's all word salad. He does what they all do, takes whatever he does for a living, and then tries to talk as if governing would be no different than him coming to the office and writing a few lines of code or downloading the latest drivers for a laptop. This is the kind of goofy, corny pap that we don't need. According to the white media, there's another Democrat who's actually favored to win and is apparently the front-runner. Mr. Gilchrist is allegedly polling at a distant third. And I do consider it noteworthy that while Whitmer is not endorsing anyone, yet, she's also not trying to cut Gilchrist off at the knees or take subtle digs at him. So they're not giving him the Eric Adams treatment. Yet. But the point of this morning's briefing is to remind you the Democrats have already begun their process of trying to position people for future races. It's like I've told you for a while now. If you're trying to set up a properly structured political campaign, you actually have to begin campaigning 2 years before the election date. And that's even after you have to take out time to make sure you got everything in place first. But you actually start the steady drumbeat of your campaign 2 years on average before the actual election date itself. Michigan's gubernatorial race takes place in November of next year. That's 20 months from now. So what's happening is Gilchrist is making sure that he positions himself properly, at least in terms of giving himself a good lead time. That makes sense. Of course, we don't have to ask who his financial backers are. With the white media giving this guy a push, it's pretty easy to guess whose short list he's on. But what we're seeing is the Democrats trying to give rise to a bumper crop of so-called rising stars in the party. But when you look at what the white media cites as the reason for these black stars rising, it always comes back to their alleged ability to be able to get those black votes. That's what the white media normally points to as their ability to be rising stars because they got pulled with the black community. They can go ahead and pull those black votes. And of course, in the black media, we have to ask, is that true? Because most of the time what we find is it's only true that the white media has said it. So I think that if Mr. Gilchrist II calls himself trying to get some black votes, then black Michiganders owe it to themselves to go ahead and pull his coat and ask him, what are you going to be doing for black residents here? Ask him where he stands on reparations. Ask him whether or not he's been spending all of his time with these black preachers and pulpit pimps and these so-called community activists and organizers set up by the DNC, or has he been dealing with the black grassroots? It's time to impose a political litmus test for anybody who wants black votes, and that's going to be coming from the grassroots itself. We cannot and should not be depending on anyone else to put the pressure on these would-be political leaders except for ourselves. And the fact that this guy has not had a track record of actually coming to the black community, but rather he's letting white money do all the heavy lifting for him, that seems to answer a lot of questions in my book, and it doesn't answer them the right way. Black people have to break the bad habit of voting for political sock puppets, but that's only the first step. The next is exercising political intelligence, and that means voting for people who we have selected. Both of the major parties make it a point to flood the zone with tethers and other assorted bootlicks in their attempt to try to head us off from actually choosing people on our own, cultivating talent on our own. For the longest time, we've had the political process backwards. What's supposed to happen is you're supposed to make demands of a political candidate first. And then that person is supposed to accede to those demands, and then if they do that and you are assured that they're solid, then you cast your vote. We've been doing it backwards. We cast our vote first, then we try to figure out what, if anything, this person allegedly stands for, and then we spend most of our time trying to sit here and argue with them and arm wrestle with them and demanding that they do things when the reality is we should never have voted for them without promises having been made in the first place. So let's go ahead and take Mr. Gilchrist II as just a case study and how already we're seeing that they're slowly but surely popping up all these individuals who we don't know, who we didn't choose. They didn't come from our ranks, and yet they're going to be telling us all these great and wonderful skills they've got. And yet when we look at their background, when we look at who it is that they've been associated with, how they came up through politics, we see the same usual suspects, the same individuals who we've already rejected. If the white media's plan was to try to excite people with the prospect of this Gilchrist character being the next governor, they've already failed. So long as he and any others of these so-called rising stars only have lip service to offer to black voters, well, in the case of Mr. Gilchrist II, I would say it's a good thing he's so proud of his computer science background. Because given the way that black voter sentiment has now matured and grown, he might want to make sure that he keeps his computer certifications current. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Amir Ree, Devin Goodwin, Kareem Lawless, Zachary Jenkins, and Leftrabia Lawson. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.